Hi, welcome to the Urban Outdoorsman SoCal video. My name is Danny Milton. Today I'm going to finally be doing a review on my most recent purchase, my 2023 Orbea Wild. I've had this bike for about 7 months now and put about 700 miles on it. I didn't want to do a review video on this bike until I had put in a significant amount of miles on it, so I can really give you guys an informed opinion of how this bike has been treating me over the last 7 months. There were several things I wanted to upgrade as well. You know, when I originally purchased this bike, I wanted to purchase the H10 model, which was the highest level aluminum frame, but they didn't have the extra large in stock, so I had to go with the H20. Most of the parts on the H20 were fine with me, except for the suspension. I definitely wanted to upgrade the fork and the shock. So I rode that original setup for quite a while, but since then I have upgraded several parts on this bike. After a couple of months of having this bike, I did go on Frankie's channel, that's Frankie EMTB. I'll put a link to his video right there. Basically went over the components and how I was liking the bike so far. A couple of the major components I've upgraded since Frankie's video have been the brakes and tires. Just want to give a quick shout out to some of my channel sponsors here. They're going across the bottom of the screen. O'Neill, 100%, Liat, Gravity Bicycles, and SSB. I do have links to all of those websites down in the description below. Those are all great companies and a lot of great products I've been using with them. So really just quick to the punch. I love this bike and it is just amazing. Everything that I've thrown at it, it's just eaten up. When I first bought this bike, I took it up to Big Bear, rode it around Snow Summit. I've been riding it all over Aliso, Laguna, Fullerton Loop, took it out to Vail, been out to Greer with it. It's amazing in everything that I've done, downhill, uphill, jumping, tech sections, everything like that. You know, the 29ers, when you get going in a straight line with these 29ers, these bikes just want to take off, and this bike's no exception. When I was looking for my next bike, I definitely wanted it to have a Bosch motor. In my opinion, the Bosch motor is the most powerful, best motor out on the market right now. There are a couple other ones that are really good, but I like the Bosch. And that was one of the main selling points of this bike for me. Also, that I was able to get a 750 watt battery with this bike. I could ride for miles in turbo, and it's crazy. I actually did a video, and I'll put a link right there, where I took this bike out to one of my local trails here, the Luge Loop. That loop is typically about 7 miles round trip. I did 3 full laps in turbo on this bike, and it was awesome. So let's go ahead and jump on the bike and go for a quick lap on a local trail here. After that, I'll talk about all the pros and cons of this bike, and then I'll give you my overall summary at the end. All right, going down to my little tester runs here. Links out here in Aliso Viejo. Lots of little technical chunky sections on here. Fast and flowy up at the top. There's no understeer or oversteer at all on this bike, which is really great. These little speed sections, bike just eats this stuff up. Stays online really well. That little bit of a stiffer frame. Just plows through, you know, these 29ers just plow through all of this chunk. Bike is definitely better than I am riding. Like all this stuff here, just eats it up, stays online. I'm on the rear brake and there's just no brake jack at all. Back end isn't kicking my feet up, you know, no pedal jack. Feels really good. Like I said, the faster you go, the better this bike is. About to go up this climb trail here, and it's fairly steep. A couple little switchback sections that get pretty tight, and right now I've got the bike in turbo. The seat post is only about 3/4 of the way up, because I really don't need to put it all the way up. I can. This part right here is pretty steep. Gonna get down into gear 3 and just butter through that, like almost no effort at all. Oh, I'm actually in gear 2. Okay, now we're in gear 3. And this is fairly steep. This part right here especially, it's difficult on an analog bike, and it'll even get your heart going on an e-bike as long as you're putting in the effort. I could totally just kick back, drop it into granny gear right now, and just cruise, like literally almost zero effort right here. It's harder staying on trail or in the right part of the trail that I want to than it actually is pedaling. So now we're going to go over some of the pros on this bike. I heard before even purchasing it that a lot of people thought that the frame was too stiff. I haven't experienced that at all. Now, at slower speeds, the frame will, I guess, maybe feel a little bit stiff. It won't kind of bend as much as maybe someone would like. But this bike wants to go fast. Like, the faster you go, the better this bike feels. And I love how stiff the frame is. Like I said earlier, one of the main reasons why I bought this bike is because it has that Bosch motor. In my opinion, the Bosch motor is the best out on the market, the most powerful, the most reliable, the longest lasting, all those kind of things as well. Matched up with that 750 watt battery. I'll do 20+ mile rides now in turbo and want to go for another ride after that. The Bluetooth controller on the handlebar that actually, you know, changes what mode you're in, things like that as well. On the handlebar is super cool. Like I said, it's Bluetooth, so there's not an extra wire going down your handlebars, so it's nice and clean, and that's working really good as well. Something really nice on the display unit on the down tube for the motor is all of the different modes are color coded, so you know exactly which mode you're in. I believe the lowest or eco mode is yellow. Then you go up to a light blue color for like eco plus. Then you have the EMTB mode, which is awesome on this bike, by the way. That's purple. And then of course turbo would be red. Something a lot of people have complained about is the cable routing through the headset. I like it. It makes the cables very low profile. When you're seated on this bike, you can barely see the cables at all. So the two cables that are going through that headset are my dropper post and my rear brake. The dropper post cable you can barely see. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Most of that goes underneath the handlebar straight into that headset. And then the rear brake cable sticks out a little bit from the front of the handlebars, drops down right into that headset. I haven't had any problems with either of those cables going through that headset so far. Kind of taking that headset apart with all those spacers is a little bit fiddly at first, but once you've done it a couple times, it goes back together really quickly. So if you do have to replace that bearing in the headset, you know, you will have to take those cables out, like your brake line and your dropper post line, and then refeed those back through later. So not too big of a deal. You know, I've run bikes for over a year without ever having to change that bearing. One of the new upgrades they made to this bike from the previous year model is they put this little rubber flap that covers the back part of the rear triangle where it's really close to the main part of the frame. So what was happening on previous year's models is that when the bike was flexing, rocks would get into that little gap. When the bike would come back to rest, it could possibly crack the frame with those little rocks in there getting smashed. You can also go through and pretty much upgrade most of the parts on the bike. If you want to upgrade the fork, you can go up to like a factory fork, or if you want a longer fork, or if you want a different dropper post, or if you want to upgrade the tires, you want to upgrade the drivetrain, you want to upgrade the battery. All of those different items you can choose separately if you want to order it directly from Orbea. They'll put all that stuff together with your custom colors and ship that bike out to a local dealer. Another great thing about this bike, as compared to the year previous model, is the geos are a lot bigger. The extra large reach just on this bike is around 505. I'll put the exact number on the bottom of the screen here. Whereas the 2022 model, the extra large reach was somewhere in the 480s, maybe under 490. So they went up about 10-15 millimeters just on the reach. I mean, everything else is larger as well, but that's usually the one thing that people kind of correlate to bigger geos. Okay, so after all those pros, now it's time to go over some of the cons. And some of these cons are actually identical to some of the pros, just depends on how you look at it. The first being the cables going through that stem. Now, if you're not the type of person that likes to take apart your bike or just, you know, work on it, anything like that, something like that is going to be kind of difficult. You know, you take to your local place and it's just going to take a little bit longer for them to take that bike apart, route those cables through and things like that. So definitely a con if you don't like to fiddle with your bike like I do. The cables are internally routed, but there's really no routing channels or anything to hold them in place. They basically just sit beside the battery in the down tube and are kind of loose in there. I haven't had a problem with them rattling too much. It seems like a couple times I've had maybe a little bit of rattle, but it's kind of gone away on its own. Another big problem for a lot of people is this battery does not come out easily. To get this battery out, you have to take out the motor to drop the battery out, and that is kind of a big negative for a lot of people. Another thing that is a pro and a con depending on how you ride is that stiffness of the frame. Now, if you're a slower rider or maybe a beginner rider, that frame is going to feel very stiff. It's not going to be very forgiving at slower speeds, so it may feel too stiff for you. Another small problem I have with this bike is the display. The display is just a couple of bars and then the color code telling you which mode you're in. Something that has happened to me several times while I've had this bike is screws coming loose. It seemed like this happened a lot, probably the first 2 or 3 months that I had this bike. The motor mount screws would come loose a little bit. I'd have to retighten those. The screws holding the rear shock, top and bottom, would come a little bit loose after a ride. So every time I would go out, I would just go through and just check everything to make sure everything was tightened up. And sure enough, sometimes those screws would be a little bit loose. You know, that shock mount screw would be loose. The motor mount screws would be loose a little bit. What's happened to me a couple times is the nut that holds on the chain ring. Now that's a reverse thread nut. So as you're spinning the wheels, you know, spinning the pedals forward, that nut is not supposed to come loose because it's reverse thread. And it has come loose on me a couple of times. One time up at Snow Summit, it completely came off and I had to, you know, obviously pull over and rethread that. And probably about a month ago, it came loose on me on a ride. For some reason, all of a sudden, you know, my bike wasn't shifting and I looked down and the chainring was moving back and forth about 1/4 of an inch. So the biggest problem I've had with this bike is when I originally purchased it from Jensen, I basically went straight from Jensen to Gravity Bikes and upgrade, you know, put in a bunch of new parts on it, replaced the fork and the shock. When I tried to put the new shock in, it wasn't fitting really well and I had to kind of force it into place. So about a month after that, I'm out at San Clemente and for some reason, all of a sudden my bike is just, it's acting super weird. The back end is not flexing the way it's supposed to, and I look down and there is literally like no air in my rear shock. So basically what happened was some part of the rear triangle or the connector part was bent and it was flexing my rear shock at a weird angle. And basically what happened is it destroyed my rear shock. So I had to take the bike back to Jensen. They sent it back to Orbea. Orbea gave me a brand new frame, sent it back to Jensen, and they put my bike together. So the problem with all that is the rear shock I had on the bike was aftermarket and I spent $400 on that. I had just put a brand new protection kit on there, so that was $125. And then when Orbea sent the new frame back to Jensen, I had to pay Jensen $150 just to put the bike back together. So because Orbea sent me a bent frame, I was out an additional $600–700, which was kind of a bummer. So another con is that the rear shock is upside down. Now on the daily, that's not really a big problem, but anytime you want to make adjustments to it, especially that low speed rebound, that's way underneath the bottom of it. It's really hard to make adjustments to it with it down there on the bottom. And the last thing I'm going to complain about is this bike still does not connect to my Garmin. You know, it's really cool. On my Giant Rain, I was able to connect the e-bike motor to my watch. So I knew exactly what mode I was in, how much battery power I had left and all that kind of stuff. That so far has not been something they've upgraded this Bosch system to do. It does not connect to Garmin. Hopefully there's going to be some type of update in the futures that I could do that. So overall, what do I think about this bike? I mean, I love it. Despite all of those cons, I've had so much fun riding this bike pretty much everywhere. Places like Sky Park and Snow Summit and Vail, my local trails here, Aliso, Laguna, all kinds of places. I've had a great time. Checked off a couple of new trails on this bike as well, one of those being Art School. This bike is super fast on the downs. I mean, like I said, with those 29ers front and rear, when you get this bike pointed straight, those 29ers just roll over everything so fast, and I've been on the brakes so much, it's crazy. And like I said, the faster you go on this bike, the better it handles. With that stiff frame, it goes where you want it to go, especially when you're going really fast. The larger Geos are nice for me because, you know, I'm a taller rider, I'm 6'2". Typically in the past, I've always had bikes with like a, you know, 490 to 500 reach. but this reach being over 500 took a little bit getting used to, but I really like it. The motor and the battery are awesome. I mean, the Bosch motor is just amazing. It's got so much power. I love it. Having that 750 100-watt-hour battery is just amazing. I mean, I just basically riding turbo all the time now. The riding performance has been really good. This is a longer wheelbase bike, but I haven't had any problems riding this bike through tech sections or in tight switchbacks. Like I said, I'm a bigger rider, so I'm kind of used to it. On the downhills, I haven't noticed any pedal kickback or any of the brake jacking that some bikes have, you know, as you're going downhill. When you hit those rear brakes, sometimes the bike will either lurch forward or lurch back. And I haven't noticed anything like that. You know, with that coil shock on the back, this bike is just butter going through those really fast techie sections. You know, like the really chunky section that we did earlier on links, this bike is just butter through there. Also, while pedaling uphill, I don't have to lean super far forward. You know, the front tire doesn't want to come up. You know, I mean, obviously, if you go up something really steep like a rock and the front tire bounces, it might come up a little bit, but I've only had that happen to me maybe twice in like 7 months. All right, so thanks so much for watching. I know that was a lot of talking. I tried to put some B-roll in the background so you just didn't have to look at my face for however long this took, but it's a lot of information I want to give to you guys. If you do have any questions for me or about this bike, please leave those in the comments below. I try to get back to you guys as soon as I can. You know, I'm sure there's something I forgot or some little tiny tidbit that someone's going to want to know about the bike. Just ask me those questions and I'll get back to you. All right, so do all that fun stuff for me, please. Smash that like button, share, comment, definitely subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. The more of those likes and the more subscribes you guys give me, the more this video gets out to other people, you know, YouTube and their algorithms and stuff. Trying to do videos Fridays at 5, so make sure you click that bell notification so that you do get notified when those new videos come out. And last but not least, click on one of the boxes in the corners. One will take you to a rides playlist, another to a bunch of products I reviewed, and you can click the logo in that corner, the Urban Outdoorsman SoCal logo, to subscribe. Thanks a lot.